Before we begin today's video, I would like to give a shout out to one of our newest subscribers, Ice Wolf Command. Thank you for subscribing, and welcome to the family. And now on with today's video. Over on my account on X, or as it was previously known, Twitter, I have gained a lot of followers, mostly of the VTuber variety. You know, the individuals who have an avatar in their stead to take place of their live action self. I do something similar with these videos. You see my avatar pop up every so often. Nothing much, just a dark void with two red eyes. But, anywho, not important. What is important is that a lot of these VTuber followers are artists who do commissions. Creating models like themselves, or having some form of logo, a title card, or even a banner that you could put up on your YouTube channel or on your X profile. I had actually been talking with 3 such artists. The Brenda VTuber, Cute Jessamy, and Henna Fairy. Both Jessamy and Henna Fairy actually have Ko-Fi accounts, so you should be able to see what they have done and even be able to commission their artwork. Brenda says that she has a Discord profile. I do not know what her account is. But assuming that it is the same as the username she has for X, we'll say it is that username, Brenda_Dean99. Now, let me just say that each artist has a different price structure. Some artists will even have special deals on their pieces. When I was talking with Jessamy and Brenda, they had told me about special deals and combos and even a couple of discounts that they were doing for a limited time. But all 3 of them did make sure to tell me about their prices, flat out rates for each of their pieces. And I completely support paying these artists. Not in exposure. That is rude. You are to pay them in full. And honestly, these 3 artists have reasonable prices for their content. Again, it's going to vary based off of the details that you are wanting for your piece and the complexity. For example, a more detailed price will probably run you in the higher 300s range, while something simplistic could run you anywhere between $100 and $200. It just depends not only on the artist, but on the commission you are wanting from them. If you have no way of paying these artists, you do not ask them for a commission. Do not waste their time on something that they do not get paid for. You must pay them. It is like you are going to the store and buying a piece of artwork from one of the decoration aisles. You do not get any special discounts just because you might know somebody or that you're giving it as a present to someone. Pay them. They deserve it. These three artists and many other artists that I have been talking to over on X are very talented, and I really enjoyed looking at the pieces that they showed me. So if you want to commission these lovely artists, I would definitely recommend doing so. Anywho, that being said, thank you, Hannah Ferry, Cute Jessamy, and the Brenda VTuber for taking the time to talk with me about your work. Let's go ahead and get into the video and talk about some other rather talented artists, the Gnomes. Welcome back to Pathfinder Hero Frame, where we take a look at the different ancestries within Pathfinder 2nd Edition and see what type of characters we can create based off of the heritage, backgrounds, and classes that best suit these ancestries, going off of their lore. And the Gnomes are a particularly interesting one. You see, they are not like some of the other ancestries on the world of Galarian. Much like the elves, they come from another world. Well, less of a world and more of a plane of existence. Much like in Dungeons & Dragons, we have a world of the Fae. That would be the first world. We also have our version of the Plane of Shadows, which we had talked about with the Fetchlings, the Netherworld. These two planes mirror the main universe, the world of Galarian in this case. And in the case of the Gnomes, they used to live in the first world, and back in the day migrated from the world of the Fae to the main universe proper, to the world of Galarian. I honestly find this a little bit interesting. This makes sense for Fae-themed ancestries. They come from the world of the Fae to the material plane. And it seems to follow this trend with the Gnomes. But there's another interesting trait. Now, according to the lore, this is just a theory. But because of this migration from the first world to the material plane, the Gnomes have started to become afflicted with a weird condition known simply as the bleaching. Gnomes are normally vibrant beings, full of color and life. This even shows in their personality. They are curious about the world around them. They are excited all of the time. Almost like childish wonder. This affliction, known as the bleaching, is stated to be a form of depression made manifest on their physical form as well as their personality. The color literally draining from their skin and their hair and even their eyes. Many gnomes theorize that because of the immigration from the first world, it is harder to find joy in the simplest of things. So they must continue to explore and to find excitement in everything they do. Other ancestries seem to find this more of a manic. It's hard to pronounce this word with this voice. A manic determination. This pursuit of literal happiness to stave off the effects of this bleaching is, well, depressing to say the least, but it is definitely representative of real life depression. It is basically portraying the gnomes as a physical and spiritual representation of mental illness in our own world. And I find that to be fascinating. We've seen this a lot with other ancestries, where they take certain aspects from the real world and bring them into fiction and exaggerate them a little bit. And we're seeing this once again with this bleaching process. The endless pursuit of happiness. Now, going off of that depressing note, gnomes will normally, yes, they will tend to marry, but they aren't going to tie themselves down. One of those things that they try not to do as a way to stave off the effects of the bleaching. They would rather explore the world in pursuit of excitement. Sort of like how a lot of halflings are depicted in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, when a child is born to a gnome family, every gnome in the community comes together to help raise the child. They quite literally take the saying, "It takes a village to raise a child," to a literal degree. Honestly, it's fascinating. Another aspect of the gnomes is that male gnomes have multi-syllable names. Their names are extremely long, to the point of somewhat annoyance. They don't mind having nicknames, but they prefer to have them long. While female gnomes have extremely short and simple names. Another interesting feature of the gnomes. Now, another type of gnome that we have here are the umbral gnomes, also known as Drathnila. These are your not the netherworld. They are in the Darklands, which we had talked about during the dwarf video. The Darklands, Pathfinder's version of the Underdark. And speaking of the Underdark dwarves, the Drathnelar do not like dwarves. It is a common occurrence that the Drathnelar and the Duergar of Pathfinder, I forgot their names, will go to war with each other. It has become so common that the Underdark gnomes have taken to seclusion and secrecy with their communities. They'll take everybody and just move to a secret spot. No one can find them. The dwarves will not be able to find them and start another war with them. It's kind of sad. And with this secrecy, it is a little bit more difficult for a Drathnilar to avoid the bleaching. So what they do is take to chores around the house. Some might still try to go off in search of some form of excitement, but for the most part, the Drathnilar will stay at home and do mundane chores to try to stave off the effects of the bleaching. Now, let's go ahead and get straight into the main aspect of the video and talk about recommendations for your gnome character. For heritages, we have the following: Chameleon, Fey Touched, Kichimuna, Sensate, Umbral, Vivacious, and Wellspring. For backgrounds, it is recommended to take the Animal Wrangler, Barkeep, Entertainer, Gambler, Merchant, Nomad, and even the Tinker. Going through the backgrounds, I have the following recommendations to add on to that: the Artist, the Attention Addict, Bibliophile, Bookish Providence, Clock Fighter, Clockwork Researcher, Fey Bound, Fight Breaker, Free Spirit, Gunsmith, Mechanic, Mechanical Symbiosis, Medicinal Clocksmith, Relentless Dedication, Scholar, Spell Seeker, Thrill Seeker, Trailblazer, and Wanderlust. Why this wasn't on the main recommendations, I have no idea. But there are definitely some good pairings for heritage and background, like the Feybound and the Fey-Touched Gnome. I would even go with a Thrill Seeker and maybe even Wellspring. Maybe go for a Free Spirit and a Vivacious. Maybe even go a little off script and go for a Cook. A lot of chefs find excitement when they cook, so I could definitely see a gnome chef feeling the same way, finding new recipes that will excite them, and perhaps even excite others. Not only bringing joy to themselves, but to the people they feed. It's an interesting thought. When thinking about the gnomes, there are also some gnomes from Dungeons & Dragons that I think would work for some characters in Pathfinder. In the world of Dragonlance, for example, we have the Nevermind gnome. We also have rock gnomes in the main canon of Dungeons & Dragons, also known as Tinker Gnomes. Now, we don't exactly have Tinker Gnomes in Pathfinder, so I would probably recommend perhaps the Vivacious Gnome, and go with a Tinker background or even a Mechanic. For the Nevermind Gnomes, I would definitely recommend going with a Mechanical Symbiosis. Maybe even a Mechanic or Medicinal Clocksmith. Something similar to that. That's totally up to you. These are just some recommendations that I am putting out there. I definitely want to make a gnome who suffers from the bleaching. Vivacious gnome, I'm thinking Tinker. Maybe even make them a gunslinger. I actually had a artificer gnome, one of my first builds actually. A rock gnome artificer who had a giant cannon as his weapon. so I might end up recreating him in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Be very fun to do. Anyway, I am getting off topic. For classes, it is recommended pre-remaster to use either the Druid or the Sorcerer. We don't have any recommendations in the Player Core 1, which is the remastered Player's Handbook. But I thought it would be nice to mention the pre-remaster recommendations, and these are the two that are recommended. Now, without further ado, let us go ahead and see what subclasses from each class would be perfect for a gnome character. Shall we begin? Starting things off with the Alchemist. Much like in Dungeons & Dragons, I kind of expect some gnomes who are fascinated with mechanics and tinkering to accidentally cause a few accidents in their workshops, causing things to explode in their face. But that is the price to pay for innovation. So for research field, obviously the bomber would make a half-decent research field for a gnome, but I would also recommend the chirurgeon and the toxicologist. Learning about different healing elements and even different toxins could be useful information for a gnome to learn, especially if some gnomes are looking for a medicinal way to cure the bleaching. I only just now thought of that as a good example of a chirurgeon gnome, but more often than not, you're going to see something more along the lines of an apothecary. Being able to research the different aspects, the different medicinal purposes that plant life can offer. Moving on to our next class is the Animist. For your apparitions, I would definitely recommend the Monarch of the Fey Courts, Reveler in Lost Glee, Vanguard of Roaring Waters, more as a nod to the Tian Sha heritage, and the Imposter in Hidden Places as a nod to Umbral Gnomes. Going over to the Barbarian next, I don't think there's going to be very many Barbarian Gnomes, but I would be remiss if I did not include them in this video. So as an instinct, I would probably recommend the Elemental Barbarian, more specifically of Earth, Water, and Wood. Moving on to the Bard, probably one of your more common classes that a gnome would have. I would recommend the Enigma or even the Polymath. Going on to the Champion, the Cause of Grandeur makes for a perfect gnome that is looking for excitement in their life. And moving on to the Cleric, we have a nice list of deities to go off of for the gnome. The main four that are recommended are Caden Killian, Desna, Gozre, and Shellen. But there is another deity that I would recommend for your gnome character. More specifically for your Umbral Gnomes, as they worship this deity as the first of their kind. An Umbral Gnome who does suffer from the bleaching herself, but managed to achieve godhood. Nivi Rambodazzle, the Grey Polychrome. Moving on to Druid. Orders of the Stone, Untamed, and even the Wave would make for decent gnome druids, in my honest opinion. I would say leaning more towards Stone and Untamed. Moving on to the Gunslinger. Like I said, this is the character I would like to make. Personally, I would go with the Vanguard for my own character, but for a general gnome character, the Way of the Drifter, Pistolero, and Spellshot would be perfect choices. Moving on to the Investigator. For your methodologies, I would highly recommend Empiricism, Forensic Medicine, and even Interrogation. For the Magus, the hybrid studies I would recommend are the Laughing Shadow and Sparkling Target. Moving on to the Oracle, this one was a little trickier, but I believe that the mysteries of the ancestors, cosmos, life, and lore would make for some good Oracle gnomes. Going over to the Rogue. This is probably going to be your most common non-spell casting gnome. For your rackets, I would recommend the Eldritch Trickster, the Scoundrel, and the Thief. Next is the Sorcerer. The three bloodlines I would recommend are Fey, Shadow, and Elemental. Shadow mostly for your Umbral gnomes. Fey for anybody who has been in touch with the First World, which is most gnomes, but you could say Fey Touch Gnome would have a better connection to a Fey bloodline than most. And for your Elemental bloodline, I would once again recommend Earth, Water, and Wood. Moving on to the Swashbuckler, probably the second most common non-spell casting class that a gnome will pick up. I would recommend the Braggart, the Rascal, and Wit subclasses. Going on to the Witch, I almost skipped this one, but there were two patron themes that were decent. Wilding Steward being the obvious one, but one that I have never talked about and I think would work for a gnome, especially one who has almost completely succumbed to the bleaching, would be Faith's Flamekeeper. Again, this is a very weird subclass, and I think it would work for a gnome suffering from the bleaching because of the context of how your character met this patron. To quote, your patron contacted you in a moment your willpower was close to sputtering out. The reassuring presence was like breath and kindling, bringing an ember back aflame. Their magic giving you the strength to carry on and bring others to your cause. Your patron is basically a therapist, a deity-like therapist. I thought this was interesting, and definitely makes for an interesting character, for an interesting patron for your gnome, and why I wanted to bring it up. It especially works because you are bringing others to your patron to when they need that reassurance, that extra spark of life to come back from the brink, to try to undo the damage that their depression has done. It's fascinating, and I think it works for a more emotional character. Moving on to our final class of the day, the Wizard. Of course, this is probably going to be one of the more common things that you're going to be doing throughout any ancestry, but the arcane schools of Civic Wizardry and Unified Magical Theory are going to work pretty well for a gnome. they're going to want to learn all they can about magic. So yes, unified magical theory will be perfect. But also civic wizardry, to share what you have learned with others. I think it's fitting. And that is all we have for today's video. What do you think of the gnomes? Let me know in the comment section down below. And tell me what type of character you would make using the gnome ancestry. Until next time, this has been Drahan, and I am offline.